You know, when you picture New Zealand, you probably think of these incredible, epic landscapes, right? It feels ancient, timeless. But here's the crazy part. The human story there, it's only about 800 years old. I mean, think about that. In less than 1,000 years, it went from a land with zero people to this incredibly unique multicultural nation we see today. So that's the big question we're tackling. How in the world did that happen? We're talking about one of the most remote spots on the planet, the very last major place to be settled by humans. The journey from then to now is just this wild ride of epic voyages, intense cultural clashes, and a whole lot of reinvention. All right, so to unpack all of that, we're going to look at 5 key chapters. We'll start with the first footprints, then check out the warrior culture that emerged. After that, it's strangers on the shore, then the tough period of forging a colony, and finally, how New Zealand found its modern identity. Okay, let's dive right in. Section 1, the first footprints. And this is, well, it's kind of mind-blowing to think about. For almost all of human history, while civilizations were rising and falling everywhere else, New Zealand was just empty. No people. It was literally the final frontier in our species' journey across the globe. And then somewhere around the year 1300, everything changed. You have these master Polynesian navigators. I mean, truly some of the greatest sailors in human history, getting into these huge ocean-going canoes, or waka. They were reading the stars, the ocean swells, the birds, and they crossed thousands of miles of the Pacific. They land in this new place, which they name Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. And these incredible explorers, they become the ancestors of the Maori people. Now, they didn't just show up with canoes and supplies. They brought a whole society with them. And at the very heart of it was a concept called Wakapapa. Now, you might think of this as just a family tree, but it's so much more than that. It's like their entire cultural operating system. It's this beautiful, complex oral tradition that connects everyone to their ancestors, to the land, to the gods, everything. It was the glue that held their entire world together. All right, section 2, a warrior culture. So with this strong cultural foundation, Maori society really starts to take shape over the next few hundred years, building these really unique and powerful social structures. So how did it work? Well, everything was organized around tribes, or iwi. For safety, they built these amazing fortified villages called pa, usually high up on hills for defense. And get this, being a chief, a rangatira, wasn't just about who your dad was. You had to earn your power through respect, wisdom, and especially your prowess as a warrior. And yeah, as more people settled, competition for land and resources got fierce, which led to a lot of conflict between tribes, fought by these elite warriors known as toa. And this is where we get something you've probably seen before, the haka. Today, we might see it before a rugby match, but back then, it was way more than a ceremonial dance. It was straight-up psychological warfare. Imagine an entire group of warriors moving as one, showing their strength, their unity. It was designed to completely terrify their opponents before the battle even began. Okay, moving on to section 3, strangers on the shore. So for hundreds of years, this is the world of Aotearoa, complex, dynamic, but isolated. And then, everything is about to change. A totally new kind of person appears on the horizon, and they're about to turn this entire world upside down. The first encounter, back in 1642, was with a Dutch explorer named Abel Tasman. And it was a disaster. There was a violent misunderstanding, some of his crew were killed, and he basically just turned around and left without ever stepping ashore. Fast forward more than 100 years to 1769, and Captain James Cook shows up. This time it's different. Cook and his crew map the islands, they stick around, they establish contact, and that opened the floodgates. Soon you've got whalers, traders, and all sorts of Europeans showing up. Now, these Europeans brought a lot of stuff. New tools, different foods, all kinds of things. But there was one item that was an absolute game changer, and not in a good way: the musket. This single piece of technology completely rewrote the rules of warfare on the islands almost overnight. What followed was a truly brutal period called the Musket Wars. It was a massive arms race. Every tribe was desperate to get their hands on firearms, either to attack their rivals or just to defend themselves. The result was catastrophic. We're talking somewhere between 20 and 40,000 deaths. It was a level of destruction that completely redrew the map of who held power in Atara.
So, Section 4, forging a colony. If the Muscat Wars were a chaotic shock to the system, what came next was much more organized. This is when the British Empire decided to move in for good, and that meant treaties and, unfortunately, more wars. This brings us to 1840 and the Treaty of Waitangi, New Zealand's founding document. But there was a huge problem right from the start. It came down to translation. The English version said Maori leaders were giving up their sovereignty, complete control, to the British. But the Maori version said they were granting kawanatanga, which is more like governance. See the difference? One means you're giving away your house. The other means you're letting someone manage it. This single critical misunderstanding would fuel conflict for generations.
And while this was all happening, a tidal wave of British settlers started arriving. I mean, look at these numbers. Lured by the promise of land and a gold rush, the European population, the Pākehā, more than doubled in just 4 years. Can you imagine that? The pressure on land, on resources, on Māori society was just immense. And all that pressure, it exploded into war. The New Zealand Wars weren't a single event. They were a series of brutal conflicts that dragged on for nearly 30 years. It was Māori groups fighting to hold on to their land and their authority against the British colonial forces. In the end, the British military machine was too strong, and huge amounts of Māori land were confiscated as a result. But here's one of the wildest parts of this whole story. While all this conflict is happening, New Zealand is also becoming, one of the most progressive places on Earth. Seriously, they're bringing in old age pensions, new rules to protect workers, and then in 1893, they do something absolutely revolutionary. They become the first country in the world to give all women the vote. So you have this incredible paradox, this deep conflict happening right alongside these trailblazing social reforms. Okay, last section. Number 5, a modern identity. So as we head into the 1900s, New Zealand starts to figure out who it is separate from the British Empire. It's about finding its own 2 feet on the global stage. A really big moment comes in 1907, when it becomes a dominion. Basically, this meant you can run your own country on the inside, but we, Britain, are still going to handle your foreign policy. It was a huge step towards independence, but that little string attached to Britain, that was about to have massive consequences. And boom, a few years later, World War I breaks out. Because Britain was in, New Zealand was in, they sent a huge number of soldiers to fight alongside the Australians as the Anzacs. The losses were just devastating, especially at Gallipoli. But that incredible shared sacrifice, that national trauma, it's often pointed to as the moment New Zealand really forged its own identity, separate from the mother country. It was a baptism by fire. After the Second World War, you see another big shift. The country starts to look less towards Britain and more towards its own neighborhood. Immigration from the UK goes down, but more people start coming from Australia and especially from Asia. The face of New Zealand was changing, becoming much more of a Pacific nation. And something else, something absolutely crucial, was happening at the same time. The Maori Renaissance. After decades of being suppressed, a powerful movement rose up to bring Maori culture and language back from the brink. Activists fought hard for indigenous rights, and it worked. A huge victory came in 1987 when Te Reo Maori, the Maori language, was made an official language of New Zealand. So when you step back and look at the whole 800-year story, there's one idea that connects everything: migration. It's just constant. It starts with those first waka canoes crossing the Pacific, continues with the British sailing ships, and it's still happening today with every plane that lands in Auckland. New Zealand's story is the story of people arriving on its shores. And that really leaves us with a big thought to chew on. This history, it's messy, right? It's full of incredible achievements, terrible conflicts, and slow, hard-won integration. So as a nation that has been built layer by waves of new arrivals, what can its story teach us? What can New Zealand's past show the world about the real work of building a multicultural future?